Okay, I've been a practitioner for 40 years now, a very long time. Much of that time at PAMAM, Human Factors Engineering, but I'm not going to talk about PAMAM or present it. Rather, I would like to present a very short overview of the early days of human factors in Israel, as I know them, personal perspective. Of course, in relation with Danny Gopher, with whom I worked on during two phases. One, in his capacity as the head of human factors in the Israeli Air Force, and the second, of course, as his PhD student. I think I was among the very first students in Israel who got some formal human factors education in the university. During my MA studies in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, an engineer from the Israeli aircraft industry by the name of Yehuda Manor came for a PhD with Daniel Kahneman, and he taught a seminar on human engineering in which he presented us with military standard 1472 and some of the handbooks of that era, a human engineering guide to equipment design for the old guys here. And also, he also gave a seminar on control theory. In addition, there was a visiting professor from London by the name of Stilitz who taught a course on environmental psychology, in which we studied the effects of environmental design on human behavior. I should also mention Danny Kahneman's seminar, Attention and Perception, in which we read, among other things, the book Human Performance by Fitz and Posner, and a draft to Danny's book, which Chris mentioned earlier, Attention and Effort. So when my MA advisor, the late Professor Israel Lieblich, proposed that I join a team that was established in the Israeli Air Force, a human factors team, I was thrilled. And I came to the unit, the medical unit of the Israeli Air Force, and there I met three guys, Daniel Gopher, Colin Kessel, and Dan Zakai. Danny and Colin, at least I'm not sure about Dan Zakai, were already accomplished, experienced psychologists. Danny had already completed his PhD with Kahneman and has developed the first selection test battery for the Israeli Air Force at that time. But we didn't know too much human factors in spite of these courses in the university. We spent much time learning and started to do projects. We were not a formal unit in the Air Force, we called ourselves a group. The project was no less than designing a cockpit of a fighter aircraft. However, the project did not last long, and I think that the major accomplishment of this project was sending Danny to Urbana-Champaign. So Danny went to Urbana-Champaign, Dan Zakai returned to the Tel Aviv University, Colin became the head of the unit, which now was defined as a section inside the psychology branch. Psychology was promoted to a branch. And we started doing work for the Israeli Air Force. We did several different things. Again, learning on the job, a lot of self-tutoring. An important turning point was when Danny returned from Illinois. Here was someone, and not just someone, as you know, who really came from one of the best places, human factors institutes in the world, and suddenly there was someone who knew what he was talking about. At the same time, the Israeli Air Force started its first flight simulator unit, and Danny was asked to support that effort. I had the privilege to accompany Danny, and that was really a very rewarding task, including the long drives that we had from the center to the south and back, which gave us a lot of time to talk and discuss. In addition to the project, Danny and Colin started to try and do some organizational changes in the human factors of the Israeli Air Force. One was to start a laboratory, and the other was to try and move human factors from psychology and medicine into one of the system development units where things are really done. I was the one who harvested the fruits of these efforts because Danny left for the Technion, for full time in the Technion. And after about 2 years, I think, in 1982, Colin established PAMAM and left also. At that time, the laboratory actually started working, and that was really an important step upwards because it enabled us to do additional research work and to show our work and to not just to be able to present not just words but also designs, displays, etc. At that time, Amos Lapidot got to be the chief of the Air Force, and he was a great supporter of human factors. And he actually moved us into the system development department and promoted us to a branch. So I got to be the first branch chief, the first lieutenant colonel under that capacity. While I was on that job, I got the permission to continue my studies towards the PhD. It was only natural for me to ask Danny to be my advisor. I came here. The laboratory was the same laboratory, the same building, the Guthrie building, but it was virtually empty. The group of Peretz Lavi already worked there, but I was, I think, the only student there. I had a lot of laboratory time working on the powerful PDP 256 computer. And 1 minute. And doing the research. This research turned out to be quite interesting and important. Chris mentioned it earlier. Actually, the idea was to measure transfer of training from between different tasks in which different variable resource allocation is required. But the major finding was the fact that variable resource, the manipulation of resources actually increases the whole level of performance. Unfortunately, when I finished it, I had to return to my job in the Air Force, and I didn't get to publish an article on that. So all the glory goes to others, but rightfully so, because basically these were all Danny's idea. I have to finish now. I wanted to say a few words about major lessons that I learned from Danny. So I'll say only half of them. One is actually the very broad scope of human factors. And I will not go into details because there is no time, but I really got to follow in Danny's footsteps, in some respects at least, and do work on on training. I will also indicate that we developed the present test battery for pilots in the Air Force. I did that in collaboration with Elite, who sits up there, and also a test for navigators, which I did with Alon Kahana, who is also one of your students. And so thank you for all that, and thank you for what you will be doing in the future, which I'm sure will be also interesting and rewarding.